have it, the amendment is not agreed to. Is there another amendment or discussion?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 77 offered by myself, which extends tax cuts only for people making under $400,000 per year. You know, when they talk about their awful tax scam enacted during the last Trump presidency, my Republican colleagues like to leave out the fact that the richest people in this country, millionaires and billionaires, got 288 times more of the benefit than regular working class people, like teachers and firefighters. Let me repeat that. The richest in this country are getting 288 times more tax cuts than the average worker. That is wrong. This amendment is very simple. It extends tax cuts only for people making under $400,000 per year. It's a chance for my Republican colleagues to put their money where their mouth is. If you want to have a tax system that puts middle-class families ahead of billionaires, you should support this amendment. The yes vote on this amendment extends only the tax cuts for middle and working-class families. A no vote continues our unfair tax system that rewards billionaires over regular people.
Is there further discussion on Mr. McGovern's amendment?
I think Mr. Neguse, yeah.
Mr. Neguse?
Yes, I thank the chairwoman. I certainly support the ranking member's amendment, which I think is thoughtful and clarifies for the public what this debate really is all about. I was remiss in missing some of the debate earlier on this bill, and so I thought I might just offer a colloquy if my colleague from the good state of Texas is willing to engage me. But our good friend and former Rules Committee member, Mr. Massey, I think offered perhaps the most salient indictment of the Republican budget resolution thus far, when he released a statement earlier today on X saying, quote, "If the Republican budget passes, the deficit gets worse, not better." And I just wonder if there's, perhaps this is already debated at great length. Okay, I missed the fun.
It wasn't debated at great length.
It wasn't debated? Well, at this point, we have an opportunity, if Mr. Roy or Mr. Norman care to opine on that. But having great respect for Mr. Massey and enjoying my service with him on this committee, I would be remiss if I didn't give the two of you an opportunity to explain your change of heart and why you've become pro-deficit all of a sudden. I mean, or is this inconsistent with Mr. Massey? Happy to yield to the gentleman.
No, I'll just say, we debated this earlier and had a significant amount of conversation about it. Mr. Massey is not here to make his point. He'll be able to make that on the floor, should he wish. And as it's not surprising, I have a lot of respect for Mr. Massey and a lot of agreement in many respects with Mr. Massey on a lot of different issues, including concerns about what we do with respect to spending and tax policy. If Mr. Massey were here, we would have engaged in a colloquy between the two of us and with you about these issues. We explained earlier when Mr. Arrington was here about my belief that assumption of 2.5% growth pegged between historic 3.2 and CBO 1.8, which is basically the middle spot of there. That plus the spending cuts, which I understand there's some disagreement on spending reductions on the other side of the aisle, those two things combined, I believe, gets it to deficit neutrality. Would I like to go further? Absolutely. But this is a effort to move the ball forward. And I would note that we worked hard, including Mr. Norman and I, to include a tie between the tax policy and the spending policy, which was an important provision for us in the Budget Committee, so that there would be requirements of spending restraint and that any tax restraint would be tied to that spending restraint, which was a fairly significant change. I yield back.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman's response. I would just simply say, as you said, and you're right to note, Mr. Massey is not here. He no longer serves on this committee, and I think we know the reason why. If he were here, he'd be speaking truth to power with respect to his views on this particular bill, as he made clear to the American public by virtue of his post. No doubt that this bill increases the deficit. He knows it. The American people know it. He's no longer on this committee to say so, but I look forward to the debate on the floor tomorrow when I suspect he'll make that argument. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chair, I would just,
Yes,
I would
Ms.
just like to
Leatherton.
point out that this amendment asks the Republicans and Democrats on the committee, who do you stand with? and I definitely stand with our working families and not the millionaires and the billionaires, not the person who is earning $4 million an hour who will gain from this. So I speak in favor of the amendment and hope all of our colleagues will stand with working and middle-class families.
Well, I want to move this debate along as quickly as I can tonight. I think we've heard this in different places today, but I want to get into the record some facts, not lies and not distortions. The 2017 Trump tax cuts lowered tax rates for all Americans. In fact, the lowest earning individuals gained the most benefit. The bottom 20% of earners, those with incomes up to $26,000, saw their federal tax rate fall to its lowest level in 40 years. Earnings under $100,000 received an average cut of 16%, while the share of taxes paid by the top 1% increased. So what happened in 2017 was not simply a cut for the rich. If these tax cuts expire, it will devastate our nation's families, workers, and small business owners. The average taxpayer would see a 22% tax hike, meaning on average they'll pay $1,695 more in taxes per year. 40 million families will see their child tax credit cut in half. 26 million small businesses will be hit with a 43.4% top tax rate. This is over 20 points higher than what businesses pay in communist China. So I think it's important that we get these facts out, and I'm not going to repeat them over and over again because I want to get them in the record
Madam Chair,
at one point.
just to be clear if I can, that my amendment would protect the tax breaks for middle-class families. It just wouldn't extend them to the very wealthy.
I understand what you said, Mr. McGovern. Now, hearing none, the question's on the amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed
That's
to.
for a roll call.
The gentleman, the clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Is there any